They mocked the silent alien girl each day, until a human janitor shared her meal. The cafeteria was a box of noise and chrome, its ceiling too low for the amount of sound trapped beneath it. The air vibrated with laughter that wasn't kind, and the clatter of trays that weren't meant to be gentle. Every table shimmered with the metallic reflection of fluorescent lights, and every face seemed sharper under their sterile glare. In the far corner sat the alien girl, small, pale blue, with eyes that never blinked when people looked at her. She wore the Academy's grey uniform like armor, sitting straight-backed while her untouched food cooled. The students called her Syl because she never spoke. The real name the translators failed to render had more syllables than the human tongue could manage. So Syl became both her label and her curse. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Today, as on most days, the first piece of food arced across the room before the first warning bell. A lump of synthetic mash, purple, pliant, supposedly full of nutrients, sailed through the air and struck the side of her tray. The impact made no sound beyond a wet slap, but it was enough to draw attention. The laughter came jagged and familiar. Someone whispered that aliens didn't eat real food, that they fed on starlight or pity. Another said she probably didn't even taste it. Syl didn't flinch. Her pupils dilated faintly, like deep water disturbed, but her hands remained on her knees, motionless, practiced in stillness. The janitor saw it all while sweeping by the drink dispensers. His name was Jonas Carr, 53, hair more salt than pepper, uniform sleeves rolled up to reveal calloused forearms. He had worked at Aldrin Technical for 10 years, long enough to see the generation of young humanity forget the wars that once made them cautious about cruelty. Jonas wasn't supposed to intervene. His contract stated clearly. Maintenance staff were non-instructional and non-disciplinary. But something about the way the girl sat, so quiet, so unyielding, made the rules feel like paper fences. He paused, broom in hand, and waited to see if any of the teachers on duty would notice. None did. They rarely did. When the second piece of mash flew, Jonas moved before it landed. His hand shot out, catching it mid-air like a reflex born from years of dodging falling tools. The laughter stuttered, caught between humor and surprise. Jonas looked down at the damp purple lump in his palm. It was warm. Without breaking eye contact with the nearest group of giggling students, he brought it to his mouth and took a slow, deliberate bite. The cafeteria went silent. He chewed once, twice, then nodded slightly. "Tastes fine," he said, his voice gravelly but steady. He placed the rest of the lump back onto Syl's tray, set his broom against the wall and sat opposite her. The bench creaked beneath his weight. He reached for one of the metallic utensils, an outdated fork with dulled prongs, and began to eat from the same portion of food that everyone had just mocked. Around them, whispers started to move again, uncertain and uneasy. Syl stared at him, eyes wide enough to catch reflections of light that made them look like twin moons. Jonas didn't look back at her right away. He focused on chewing, swallowing, taking another bite. The food wasn't good. It was synthetic cafeteria fare designed for nutrient balance, not taste, but he ate it as if it mattered. Finally, he said quietly, "You can eat, right? You don't mind sharing?" She tilted her head, blinked slowly, and gave a tiny nod. Her fingers twitched toward the tray, hesitant but curious. For the first time, she lifted a piece and ate beside him. No one laughed this time. Some students muttered that the janitor had gone crazy, that maybe aliens could hypnotize people. Others avoided looking altogether. The bell rang, scattering them into corridors like startled fish. When the room emptied, Jonas stayed seated, finishing what was left on the tray. Syl hadn't moved since the noise faded. He pushed the tray slightly toward her and said, "Next time they throw it, you make sure it lands here instead." He gestured at the table. "We'll make a meal of it." She blinked again, slow and deliberate, then pressed her fingers lightly to her chest, a gesture of thanks maybe, or acknowledgement. Jonas stood, collected his broom, and went back to sweeping. The quiet that followed felt heavier than the noise before. The next day the game continued, but it changed shape. The first piece of food thrown at Syl didn't reach her. Jonas caught it again, not even looking up this time. He dropped it onto his own tray and ate it. The cafeteria buzzed with uneasy amusement. "He's feeding the aliens," someone muttered. "Maybe she's paying him in space credits." Jonas ignored them. Syl kept eating in silence. But every day more students hesitated before throwing anything. Mockery without laughter loses momentum, and within a week the food stopped flying. Jonas began to notice details he hadn't before. The girl's uniform cuffs were always too long, hiding faint bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like veins of light under her skin. Her eyes weren't just blue. They held shifting hues, faint as auroras. She never spoke, but occasionally emitted small vibrations that made the utensils tremble if she was startled. Her species, he remembered from the planetary intake newsfeed, had arrived after the Erelon conflict ended. Refugees from a broken moon, mostly children sent to integrate among humans. Syl was one of the first. The Academy claimed it was diversity. In practice, it was exile wrapped in education. Jonas had seen kindness wear out before in wars and in cities. He didn't expect it here in a cafeteria. But the way Syl sat across from him each day, careful, curious, slowly adjusting to the rhythm of his chewing and small grunts of conversation, it felt like watching someone learn gravity for the first time. She mimicked his posture, the way he wiped his mouth with a napkin, even the way he tapped his fork against the tray before eating. It wasn't imitation born of mockery. It was studying cautious trust-building molecule by molecule. One afternoon, while cleaning up after hours, Jonas found a small object left on the table where they usually sat. It was a fragment of something crystalline, faintly glowing. When he picked it up, warmth spread through his fingers like static. He turned it over and saw tiny etchings on the surface, symbols that shifted when viewed from different angles. He didn't understand them, but they felt deliberate, purposeful. The next day, Syl noticed him wearing it as a pendant tied with string. Her gaze brightened slightly, and she pressed her palms together in a brief gesture that looked almost like laughter. That small crystal would later become important, though Jonas couldn't know that yet. At the time, he simply felt that the cafeteria air seemed less cruel when she smiled, even silently. He found himself arriving early just to set her tray before anyone else entered. The cooks didn't question him. They liked that he made their cleanup easier. They even started slipping him extra portions, which he quietly shared with her later. Somewhere between sweeping floors and cleaning spills, Jonas realized he'd become her only consistent human contact. One evening, while he was locking up, he saw her waiting by the back door. She wasn't supposed to be there. Academy regulations kept students in dorm zones after dark, but she stood under the flickering light, holding something close to her chest. When he approached, she extended it, a folded piece of cafeteria napkin covered in charcoal markings. The lines were messy but recognizable, two figures sitting at a table sharing a tray, surrounded by blurred shapes that looked like shadows or laughter. Above it, in halting written English, were two words, "Thank you." Jonas swallowed hard. He wasn't a man prone to sentiment, but the simplicity of those words, written by hands that trembled from a throat that could not speak, hit deeper than any shouted apology from the kids who had mocked her. He took the napkin carefully, as if it were fragile glass. "You're welcome, Syl," he said softly. "Any time." That night he found it difficult to sleep. The image of her sitting under the buzzing light, offering gratitude with charcoal-stained fingers, stayed behind his eyelids. He thought about the wars he'd seen broadcast years ago, the footage of alien ruins, the news commentators calling them unfit for adaptation. Humanity had been proud of its mercy, but mercy wasn't the same as kindness. Mercy let you save someone. Kindness let you eat beside them. Over the following weeks, the routine deepened. He learned to recognize her moods through subtle cues, the dimming or brightening of her skin's luminescence, the rhythm of her breath. When she was nervous, her light flickered in short pulses. When she was calm, it flowed slow and steady. Sometimes she would hum, not in the musical sense, but with low vibrations that resonated through the metal table, shaping faint patterns in spilled liquid. He realized she communicated through resonance, not words. He couldn't understand it, but he could feel it. One morning, however, she didn't appear. Her tray sat untouched. The cafeteria noise returned, students emboldened by her absence. Jonas waited through lunch, through cleanup, even past closing time. When she didn't show, unease began to knot in his chest. He asked a supervisor, who shrugged. "Probably transferred," the man said. "Those alien kids get moved around if they don't perform." Jonas didn't like the tone. Transfers didn't happen without notice, and certainly not mid-term. That evening, He went down the lower maintenance corridors, where access logs said her dorm section connected to the ventilation systems. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and ozone. He followed the hum of the lights until he reached a door marked with a universal hazard symbol. Behind it came a soft, rhythmic vibration, familiar. He pressed his ear against the metal. The pattern was unmistakable. Sill's resonance, weaker than usual, trembling like a heartbeat under strain. Jonas's pulse quickened. He glanced around, no one in sight. He'd been a janitor long enough to know which doors required key access and which could be opened with a firm twist of the wrist and a good push. This one yielded after a moment. Inside was a small room lit by sterile blue panels. Sill sat on a metal bed, her hands cuffed loosely in front of her, eyes half-lidded. A scientist, young, distracted, typed notes into a console nearby. The screen displayed fluctuating graphs labeled Integration Viability. Jonas froze, anger crawling up his throat. "What is this?" he demanded. The scientist jumped, startled, and stammered something about authorized observation. Jonas didn't wait. He stepped forward, placing himself between the man and the girl. "She's a student, not a specimen," he said, voice rising. The scientist opened his mouth to protest, but Sill made a faint sound, a low hum that vibrated through the floor. The lights flickered. Jonas glanced back at her, seeing fear edged with apology in her gaze. He softened immediately. "It's all right," he murmured. "We're leaving." Alarms didn't trigger when he released her cuffs. Maybe she had already disabled them. Together, they slipped out through service corridors, moving under the rhythm of flickering lights. Outside, the night air was cold and smelled of rain. Sill's luminescence dimmed almost to nothing, blending her into the shadows. Jonas guided her toward the maintenance shed behind the cafeteria. There he wrapped her in an old thermal blanket and gave her half a sandwich from his locker. She accepted it, ate slowly, eyes never leaving his face. When she finished, she reached into her pocket and produced another crystal fragment, larger than before, glowing faintly with internal light. She placed it in his palm, closing his fingers around it. The hum it emitted was low and steady, like a promise. Jonas didn't understand, but he knew it meant something important. "We'll figure this out," he said quietly. "You're safe here." For the first time she smiled, small, tentative, but unmistakable. Her light flared briefly, painting the shed's metal walls in shifting shades of blue. It was beautiful, fragile, human in its sincerity. Jonas sat beside her until dawn, the crystal warm in his hand, the world outside still unaware that something extraordinary had begun in a cafeteria corner where cruelty once echoed. By morning, the academy buzzed with rumors. Students whispered that the alien girl had escaped, that someone saw her lights vanish into the maintenance tunnels. The teachers dismissed it as imagination, but security patrols doubled. Jonas worked his shift as if nothing had changed, sweeping floors and emptying bins while his mind spun through contingencies. The shed behind the cafeteria was hidden for now, but not forever. He'd stashed Sill there with food, water, and an old blanket, but the academy had cameras, schedules, drones. Hiding someone wasn't just dangerous, it was impossible long-term. When he returned to her that evening, she was awake and tracing patterns on the metal floor with glowing fingertips. The lines she drew shimmered briefly, then faded like frost. Jonas crouched beside her. "You been warm enough?" She nodded. He passed her another wrapped meal, the kind meant for workers on long shifts. She peeled it open carefully, studying the layers of bread and protein paste like they were delicate art. Watching her eat reminded him how simple dignity could look when you'd nearly forgotten it existed. He wanted to ask questions, what the scientists had done, what those crystals meant, but she had no voice to answer. Instead, she pressed one glowing finger against the air between them. A faint vibration spread through the room, then resolved into an image projected on the wall. A swirling sphere, half-broken, bleeding light from fissures. Her homeworld, he realized. The projection pulsed, fractured, and faded into dust. Then she drew a small figure beside it, a blue silhouette, and another figure beside that, tall and human-shaped. Between them, she etched a line that pulsed in rhythm with her breathing. Jonas exhaled. "You and me, huh?" he said softly. She looked up, blinked once, then nodded. The gesture carried more meaning than any word. That night the wind howled across the empty grounds. Jonas sat at the doorway of the shed, Watching the dark sky where the planet's two moons hung like distant eyes, he thought about how quiet the stars looked. No judgment, no applause, just endurance. Humanity liked to believe it had inherited the universe by right, but looking at Syl, he wondered if the universe had simply been waiting for someone to remember what kindness felt like. The next morning, patrols reached the cafeteria wing. Two security officers walked in, scanning their visors across the floors. Jonas was cleaning tables when they approached. "Maintenance worker Carr," one said. "We're looking for non-human life signatures. Anything unusual after hours?" Jonas shrugged, steady as stone. "Only thing alive in here after hours is the roaches," he said. They scanned the room anyway, their detectors humming before leaving with curt nods. He waited until the sound of boots faded, before letting out a breath. He couldn't hide her forever, but maybe long enough to think of something better. That evening he found Syl sitting cross-legged, holding both crystals in her lap. The small one he'd worn as a pendant, and the larger one she'd given him later. Between them shimmered faint threads of light. She motioned for him to sit. When he did, she placed her hands around the crystals and let them hum. The air changed, warmer, alive, thick with unseen current. Images formed in his mind, not like speech, but impressions. He saw corridors of light, a people of sound and color, a planet cracked by war. He saw them running, hunted by machines that spoke in cold, perfect logic. And then faintly he felt her fear when she first arrived here, how every whisper and thrown object echoed the destruction she'd fled. He blinked hard, breaking the connection. "You can show thoughts," he whispered. Syl nodded slowly. "That's what they wanted, isn't it?" "The scientists, they wanted to harness it." She tilted her head in acknowledgement. "To weaponize it?" Her silence was answer enough. Jonas rubbed his temples. "Damn fools," he muttered. "You can barely keep your cafeteria clean, and you think you can handle the mind of a world." She watched him quietly, her eyes wide, unblinking. He realized she didn't just hear him. She felt his tone, his rhythm. "You need to get off this campus," he said, finally. "They'll tear you apart if they realize you're gone." Syl frowned slightly, not understanding the words but sensing their weight. She reached forward and touched his hand, sending a pulse that felt like calm resolve. The vibration lingered, grounding him. "You think we can make it?" he asked, half to himself. She nodded again, faintly, and this time her light flared, soft but certain. Jonas spent the next day mapping routes through maintenance corridors. He knew the Academy's underbelly like the back of his hand. Vents, pipes, crawl spaces, forgotten shafts. He could get her past the perimeter fence if they moved at night. Beyond that was the shuttle terminal, civilian access but guarded. Maybe someone owed him favors. Maybe he could bluff through. He'd pulled riskier things in younger days, smuggling medicine through checkpoints after the Europa quarantine. Humanity hadn't learned much about compassion since then. When he returned to the shed that night, Syl was waiting with something new. She'd drawn a pattern on the floor with the faint glow from her skin, concentric circles intersected by straight lines. It looked mathematical, purposeful. She pointed to the center, then to her crystals. "What is it?" Jonas asked. She hesitated, then projected a brief image. The Academy, then energy radiating upward, a signal escaping into orbit. He realized what she meant. The facility wasn't just experimenting on her. They were transmitting her resonance off-world. "They're calling someone," he said grimly. "Or something." Her silence was agreement, heavy as gravity. He crouched down, tracing one of the circles with his finger. "Can you stop it?" She paused, then shook her head slowly. He sighed. "Then we stop them." The simplicity of his tone made her luminescence flicker, uncertain, as if she didn't understand why he'd risk himself for her. "Because you shouldn't have to run," he said, softer. "Not again." 2 nights later, the plan began. He gave her his old maintenance uniform, rolled at the sleeves and legs. It looked absurdly large on her, but it masked her glow. They slipped through service tunnels lit by emergency strips, each step echoing like distant thunder. Syl walked barefoot, silent even on metal grates. Jonas led with his flashlight dimmed to a whisper of light. At the end of one corridor stood a sealed hatch with a retinal scanner. He cracked open a side panel and crossed 2 wires. The lock hissed open. "Old habits," he murmured. Beyond lay the research wing, sterile, bright and quiet. Machines hummed behind glass walls. cables snaking across floors. At the center was a cylindrical chamber, pulsing with faint blue light. The transmitter she had shown him. It was huge, like a spine connecting earth to sky. Inside, Jonas saw coils glowing with the same hue as her crystals. "They're feeding off your resonance," he whispered. "Using you to talk to whatever's left of your people, or whatever destroyed them." Syl stepped forward, trembling. Her hands hovered near the glass, her skin's light matching the chamber's frequency. Jonas realized the machine wasn't just harvesting her signal, it was calling it home. He saw her face twist with conflicting emotion, hope and horror tangled together. She looked at him, then back at the chamber. Before he could speak, alarms wailed. Red lights strobed through the corridor. Security drones buzzed to life, converging on their location. Jonas cursed under his breath. "Run!" he hissed, grabbing her hand. They sprinted back the way they came, but a drone dropped in front of them, taser probes crackling. Jonas swung his broom handle. An absurd weapon, but it hit true, knocking the drone sideways. "Go!" he shouted. She hesitated, then reached toward the air. A vibration pulsed outward, strong enough to make the corridor walls shudder. The drone's sensors flickered and went dark. They burst into the maintenance levels, breath ragged. "They'll seal this section soon," Jonas said. "We need to finish what we started." He looked at her, chest heaving. "Can you overload that thing?" "Make it stop broadcasting." She blinked rapidly, then pressed her palm to his chest. One firm pulse that felt like a heartbeat syncing with his own. Understanding passed between them without words. Back they went, moving fast through emergency sirens and flashing lights. Jonas's muscles screamed with effort. His lungs burned. But Syl's glow guided them, pale and sure through the chaos. When they reached the chamber again, guards were already inside, shouting orders. "Contain the alien! Disable the human!" Jonas grabbed a loose conduit pipe and swung. He wasn't strong anymore, but adrenaline turned his arms to iron. He struck one guard's helmet, sending him sprawling. Syl stepped into the light, hands raised. The air thickened instantly, the hum rising like pressure before a storm. Every glass surface vibrated, resonance rippling through metal and bone alike. The chamber walls cracked, fractures glowing like lightning veins. Jonas stumbled back, shielding his eyes. "Syl!" he shouted. "Stop! You'll kill yourself!" But she didn't stop. The hum turned into a low, mournful chord that seemed to come from the planet itself. The transmitter buckled, molten light spilling out. Jonas forced himself forward through the heat, reaching her. He grabbed her wrist, skin searing against his, and pulled her away just as the chamber imploded inward, collapsing into a silent blue flash. They fell hard against the floor, ears ringing. When the light faded, the chamber was gone, melted metal and shattered glass. The alarms died mid-wail, power surges shorting out the grid. Smoke drifted lazily through the air. Syl lay motionless beside him, faint light flickering under her skin. "Hey," he said, shaking her gently. "Stay with me, kid. Don't do this." Her eyes fluttered open. Weak but alive, she raised one trembling hand to his face and let out a tiny hum that vibrated through his skull like the whisper of an apology. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Security backup. Jonas stood, half carrying her, half dragging, and took the emergency exit. Behind them, the academy burned faint blue under the collapsing reactor lights. They reached the outer fence as dawn broke, streaks of pink carving the sky. Drones swarmed above, but none dared approach the zone, still glowing with residual energy. He found an abandoned service cart, started the engine with shaking hands, and drove until the buildings shrank behind them. When they stopped near the dry riverbed miles away, the silence was immense. Syl sat up weakly, looking at the rising sun. The light painted her features in gold instead of blue for the first time. Jonas watched her, chest tight with pride and fear. "You did it," he said. "You stopped them." She turned to him, smiling faintly, then pressed one of the remaining crystals into his hand. It was warm, alive, thrumming like a heartbeat. "What is it?" he asked. She touched his chest, then hers, then the horizon. The meaning was simple: connection. Jonas nodded slowly. "All right," he murmured. "Then we find somewhere safe. You hear me? Somewhere they can't cage you again." She nodded once, eyes reflecting the sun's edge. He felt deep down that the world had changed. Maybe only for them, maybe for everyone. Humanity had been cruel, but it had also been capable of this: Two beings sharing silence, surviving through shared defiance and a meal once thrown in mockery. He glanced at her, smiling despite everything. "You know," he said, "you still owe me lunch." Her laugh wasn't a sound, it was a ripple of light across the air, soft as dawn breaking. And together they drove toward the horizon, the crystal pulsing between them like a heartbeat that belonged to neither species alone. The road cut through the dawn like a scar of silver, leading into the skeletal remains of an old mining district where the sky was permanently dust-hazed. Jonas kept one hand on the wheel and the other on the crystal Syl had given him. It pulsed faintly, rhythm steady and alive as if syncing to his heartbeat. Beside him, she slept curled under the old thermal blanket, her faint glow dulled to a soft shimmer. Each time the engine coughed, Jonas worried it would be the last. The vehicle was old, the kind meant for hauling trash, not fugitives. Still, it carried them away from the Academy's reach, and for now that was enough. When the engine finally sputtered out, they were miles from any paved road. Jonas guided the cart to a stop beneath a half-collapsed overpass. The landscape around them was dry scrub, patches of metallic sand that caught the early light like broken mirrors. He turned off the ignition and let the silence settle. The air was cooler here, thin but breathable. Syl stirred, blinking groggily, her eyes catching the light and scattering it in small halos. "Hey," Jonas said quietly. "You hungry?" She nodded once. He handed her a ration bar, watching as she broke it in half and offered a piece back to him. He smiled and accepted. Sharing food had become their language, one of trust, of survival, of something human. They spent the day resting in the shade. Jonas cleaned the scrapes on her arms with a canteen cloth, then checked the crystal again. It was slightly brighter now, threads of light curling through it like veins. "Are you charging this thing?" he asked. Syl tilted her head and touched the crystal lightly. It brightened at her touch, then dimmed again. He wasn't sure if she understood the words, but she seemed to understand intent. "It's alive, isn't it?" he murmured. She nodded slowly, then pointed toward the horizon, west where the desert faded into blue haze. By late afternoon he spotted movement on the horizon, a convoy of small drones sweeping in formation. His gut tightened. "We have to move." He slung his pack, helped Syl to her feet, and they headed toward the hills. The ground was uneven, crunching under boots and bare feet. Each step raised fine dust that shimmered faintly in Syl's light. Behind them, faint hums grew louder, the search drones expanding their net. They reached a canyon as the sun began to fall. The walls were carved with old mining tracks, long abandoned, the metal rails corroded and warped. Jonas led them into the narrowest path and covered their entrance with a piece of broken tarp. Inside, the air smelled of rust and old rock. Syl pressed close to the wall, her glow dimming instinctively. Jonas crouched beside her, listening. The drone hum passed overhead, fading gradually. He exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "They won't stop, you know," he said quietly. "Not after what happened. They'll want answers, maybe revenge." Syl tilted her head, sensing the heaviness in his tone. She touched the crystal and projected a faint shimmer of light onto the wall. This time the image was of the Academy, no longer whole but cracked and dark. Then she added two figures walking away, one human, one glowing faintly, and a line of light connecting them. Jonas stared at it, then chuckled softly. "You really think we'll make it out clean?" She gave a small nod, eyes unwavering. "You're more optimistic than me," he said, smiling despite himself. Night fell quickly. Stars blinked through the dusty haze above the canyon, strange and cold. Jonas set a small heating coil on the ground and let it warm their corner. Syl sat beside him, watching the flickering red light like a new phenomenon. "You ever see a campfire?" he asked. She didn't respond, but her expression softened. "It's how people used to stay alive out here. Heat, light, stories. Maybe we'll make one when we get far enough away." He didn't sleep much. Every sound felt like a threat. Around midnight, a faint vibration rolled through the canyon floor, subtle but unmistakable. Syl felt it too. Her glow brightened slightly, her eyes narrowing in focus. She pressed her palm to the ground and an image rippled in the air, a signal, sharp, rhythmic, emanating from somewhere nearby. Jonas frowned. "They're scanning underground?" She shook her head, then pointed down. "Not them?" he asked. Her silence made him uneasy. The vibrations grew stronger, the kind that resonated in bone rather than air.